introduced you already, that you're coming from Yammer. You're the EMEA head of the customer success team for Yammer, and I explained why I invited you, because I like the methodology behind the adoption process at Yammer. I think this is also some key points on the success story of Yammer because of this methodology, and sure. We want to talk about this. You give us a little bit introduction talk about what's behind the methodology, and then we discuss about it.
Perfect, thank you. Guten Morgen, meine Damen und Herren. I'd like to apologize, that's the German-speaking part of my presentation concluded for this morning. So thank you very much, Bjorn, for that wonderful introduction. My name is Rav Dhaliwal, and I'm the director of Yammer's customer success team in EMEA. Now, the customer success team is an organization that works with companies from around the world to help drive and measure business value with social tools, in this case, Yammer and Office 365. And the customer success role is becoming increasingly critical in helping to drive adoption of social tools in the organization. And it's also becoming a real differentiator with our customers and in the marketplace. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do this. What is our methodology for helping drive adoption in organizations? Please feel free to follow me on Twitter and tweet during the session. That's my Twitter handle up here. And we'll have a question and answer session at the end. This is not my baby, by the way, in case anyone was wondering. So Gartner recently published a study in which they said that 20% of time spent on a social project is devoted to technology, but 80% is based on organizational culture and change. And the problem here is that change and cultural change means changing the way that we work. And as a joke, a friend once told me, the only person who likes change is a wet baby. And so it's very, very challenging. Now, why is it important that we change? Why is it important that we how's that? Is that better? Clearly, I was about to say something very controversial, so they cut the microphone off. So as I was saying, why is it important for us to change and communicate differently at work? And to demonstrate that, I'd like to give you a little story. So I flew over to Hanover on Sunday night. And for many years, I lived and worked in Australia. And I have a card from an Australian airline that lets me use the lounge access in Heathrow. And so I went to the lounge and I presented my card, and the gentleman said, "Oh, sorry, this card isn't valid, you're not allowed in." And I said, "Well, I've used this card all over the world, you know, it's valid." And he said, "No, sorry, I can't let you in." So naturally, I was a little bit annoyed. So I stepped out of the lounge and I got my phone and I got onto Twitter and I tweeted the airline in Australia and I said, "Look, I've been refused entry to this lounge. What's the problem?" And a few minutes later, a very nice person in Australia tweeted me back and said, "Oh, that's not right. Let me sort this out for you." And as I turned around, I noticed the gentleman who had refused me entry was on the telephone. And he was on the telephone and he kept looking at me and then eventually went like this. And he called me back in. And that's a demonstration of a problem that we all share. We all share some version of the same problem. And that problem is our customers are moving way faster than we are. Because our customers are using tools like Twitter and Facebook and Google+ to form into a network. They're forming into an ad hoc network that allows them to move very, very quickly. However, internally, the challenge for us is most of us are still organized in a very rigid hierarchy. And so we're a hierarchy trying to serve a network. And that example I gave is a classic example because that gentleman who would have quite happily let me in didn't really have a mechanism to ask that question of his organization. He had to just go by what he knew. And that's why we need to change, because we need to be able to service the network of our customers. And so what I'm going to talk about now for the next 10 or 15 minutes is actually how we do that change. Now, this very colorful slide represents what we call the Yammer delivery approach. And this is something that we have developed through working with quite literally thousands of customers. And the focus of the delivery approach is on helping organizations drive business value from their use of social tools. In this case, Yammer, and as I say, increasingly Office 365. Now, if I asked all of you, say, what would you like to achieve in your organizations? I suspect we'd get some variation of, well, I would like my employees to collaborate better. I would like them to share best practices. I would like them to avoid duplication. And this is very, very common, but we want to tie that to what our business outcome is. What's our business goal? Because if we don't have a business goal, we don't have any business metrics. So the first thing that we do in the Yammer delivery approach is we work with customers to define a vision. What is your vision for the use of social in your organization? And we help tie that vision to your strategic goals as a business. So for example, I would like my customers, my employees, to share best practices and avoid duplication so we can increase our sales by 10% this year. Or we can get our product to market 6 months quicker. That's an example of tying a vision to a business strategy, because the minute we have a business goal, we will have some business metrics, increase in sales, faster time to market. And that way, when we start using and communicating socially, we can go back later to see if actually we've had a positive impact on that business metric. So as I say, the first thing we want to do is define a vision. Now, there's 3 parallel streams in this very colorful diagram. And the first stream I'd like to talk to you about is the business value stream. Now, social networks tend to break down into what we like to classify as broadly 3 levels of maturity. There's what we call the adopted level of maturity, which is we're getting just people to adopt the platform and get on it and actually find out what it's for. There's the engaged level of maturity, which is we want people to actually engage in actual work. So they might be collaborating on a project or working on product development, for example. And finally, there is an embedded level of maturity, which is this idea of embedding your social tool inside business processes. And I'm going to talk about an example of that in a moment. What we want to initially do is, when we want to launch a social network in our organization, is think of business uses that will help our users adopt the platform. And we generally recommend it's good to start off with 3 to 5 business uses. And these could be as simple as we're going to move all corporate communications to our social network, or we're going to have our executive team do frequent town halls where they interact with the employees on particular things that are going on in the company. Or we may want people to use the social tool to find expertise and ask questions quicker. These are all fairly low friction uses which will help people adopt the platform. After we launch our social network, and that's represented by that first chevron here on the diagram, we're going to assess the maturity of the network. And we can do this through just a simple set of surveys that we can ask our end users. And then we want to move on to find business uses that will help people be more mature, so engage in team collaboration, as I mentioned, around a product or around a process. And finally, we want to find more and more business uses that help embed the use of social in the organization. So a very good example of embedding comes from British Gas in the UK. British Gas is one of the major energy suppliers in the United Kingdom. And they have embedded, in this case, Yammer to their field workforce. So if an engineer is out fixing a boiler and they need a part because a part's damaged, they will simply take a photograph on their phone of that part and they'll post it in a group for the supply team. And the supply team will pick up the part, dispatch it straight to the engineer on site at someone's home. This is much faster than the process that they had before. Similarly, they've embedded social into the process of time management. So if an engineer is working on repairing, say, a boiler, and that job is taking longer than expected, that engineer posts in a Yammer group for his colleagues to say, my next job is in this location, can someone else pick it up for me because I'm going to be late? And again, it allows them to move very, very quickly and to maintain customer satisfaction. And that's a very good example of what we call an embedded process. Now, parallel to this business value stream, is what we call the technology stream. And this is about doing two things. It's first of all establishing social in your organization as a service. So making sure that we have support procedures, SLAs, escalation, that it's part of your service catalog, and that we understand who is going to do the business as usual activities. For example, checking analytics or exporting data for compliance. The second part, and my feeling is a very critical part, and certainly in terms of helping to drive adoption, is integrating our social tool where users work. So this could be as simple as providing single sign-on, so the experience is seamless for the user when they log in. Provisioning your users via your corporate directory, so no one has to manually create or delete accounts. Or embedding the social tool into your intranet, because that's where users go for their information. And it's very important to consider integration because, again, it's a very big driver for adoption. You want people to be able to interact socially where they are working, not have to log out and go to some other system. The third stream here is around comms and training and community management, and this is very, very critical. In fact, the third stream and the business value stream, I would say take up about 80% of your time on a social project, the technology being a small 15 to 20%. And this is really about preparing the organization for change. And we do this through developing a solid communications, a training and education plan. Now, when it comes to communicating a social platform to your employees, my advice is always to focus on 4 key areas in your communications. You want to focus on making sure you're very clear about what we want to use social for in the organization. So going back to your vision, we want people to collaborate, share best practice so we can get to market quicker, for example. You want to also be clear about what it's not for. So the social tool is not about posting your pictures from the party you had on Friday night. There are plenty of other consumer tools that will let you do that in your private life. The third, and I think most important thing you want to communicate is how is this going to help an employee do their job and do it better. So in other words, what's in it for them? Why should they start communicating this way? What is the benefit for them? And finally, you want to focus in your communications on where do I go for help? So if I'm bought on the idea that this is valuable, what do I do if I have a question? Where do I go? Do I log a support ticket? Is there a group on my Yammer network, for example, where I can ask a question? So focusing on those 4 areas is very, very important. And that leads very nicely into developing what we call a community management strategy. Now, community managers are people who are a very visible presence on your social network. They act as guides. They help people when they are joining and point them in the right direction, connect people together, help people connect to the information people they need. But most importantly, they model the right behaviors. And it's very, very important to have a good community management strategy in place because it really helps drive adoption. Because the typical complaint from users is they sign up to a social network, they don't know what it's for, they don't know how it's going to help them, and then they leave. And the challenge is if they leave, it's very hard to get them back again. It's very, very hard. Now, after we launch our social network, what we want to do is do an assessment piece. We want to actually have a look to see what worked and what didn't work and adapt if necessary. And adapting may well be, actually, we want to choose some different business uses, or we want to enable the technology so there's more mobile access for our people, or we want to modify the way we deliver our training or our communications plan. And we should always iterate, which is what the black circles on the business value stream represent, before we move on to the next stage of looking for other business uses that are more mature. Now, this next diagram is really just a simplified version of that very colorful diagram. I call this the launch cycle. So this is just another way of representing the Yammer delivery approach, but focusing on what you need to do before you launch. So formally launching a social network in your organization is really one iteration of this cycle. So to reiterate, in our planning phase, we want to define a vision, and we want that vision linked to our business strategy. And therefore, we have our business metrics. We want to amplify what is already going on in the social network, so engage the right stakeholders and amplify the good behavior that we're seeing. And then we want to move to execution. So again, communicating and helping people understand what the value is in it for them, and defining our initial business uses. So is this employee engagement? Is it team collaboration? Is it executive comms? And then a critical piece, as I've just discussed, is enabling the community through a training and communication strategy and having community management in place and ready to go. And finally, enabling the technology, which should hopefully be, especially in a cloud world, less than 20% of the time spent basically integrating the technology so we are removing barriers for the user to adoption. We want to make the technology as easily accessible to people, no matter what device they're on or where they're working. And then finally, after we launch, we want to measure. We want to assess the social maturity of the organization. Again, we can do that through a simple survey. And we want to measure success in business terms. So what's the output in business terms? Are we closing more deals? Are we ramping up on our product development? Are we finding experts quicker? And we want to measure our maturity consistently and before we identify our next set of business uses. So aside from a delivery approach or a systematized way of doing things, what else do we need? What are the other key factors for success? Well, firstly, we want to have a clear purpose. This goes back to the statement I made around having a vision tied to business use. If we don't have a clear purpose, it's very difficult for users to understand, or our employees to understand, what the value is in it for them. Secondly is executive support, right? Executive support not only provides legitimacy, it is actually very key to driving user adoption. When users see that their executives and their management team are on the platform and are actively participating, it has a statistically proven effect in driving user adoption. Now, this doesn't mean your chief executive has to be on the platform all day, every day answering questions. It could be as simple as having a regular scheduled Q&A with the employees for an hour every month. The European Commission do this very well. The Vice President there, Mr. Maros Sefcovic, quite regularly holds Q&As for an hour every month or every 2 months with all the employees around specific topics of interest. The third, as I mentioned, is community management. I mention it again because it is so critical in making sure that we are successfully driving adoption, because community managers help spread the knowledge among the users and they help drive more people to the platform. And then finally, integrations. So again, making sure that our social tool is available wherever people work. So whether that's inside the CRM system because they're in sales, whether it's the intranet because they're in corporate comms, on their mobile device, or some other line of business application. Now, this final slide that I want to talk about is really what happens when you have your delivery approach and you give it to the marketing department. And they come up with this. This is what we call our social journey. And this is a really, really good way of describing the delivery approach I've just been talking about, because it is a journey, and it's very important to understand that it's an ongoing journey, because your business is constantly changing and your customers are constantly changing. And so we've put together this really handy interactive website called the Social Journey website, where you can actually start plugging in information about what you want to achieve, what you might need to do, who you might need to get engaged, and it will output work products for you that you can actually work on. So my call to action to you is to, please do take a look at the website and actually start putting in some information about your company to get an idea of how this might work, so you can actually start on your social journey. And remember, in addition to this, we also have a customer success team, lots of reusable assets, including a very extensive network of customers. I think we have several thousand of customers in our network. And in Germany alone, we have over 17 partners that can help in helping you drive adoption. And so with that, I'd like to thank you all for your kind attention and apologize for the the microphone issues, and like to open the floor up for any questions. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rav. Just come over here.
Sure.
So, well, you mentioned, well, if we remember your slide regarding the adoption methodology,
yeah.
We had those 3 levels, and on top, it's really much the level on how we address the business objectives. So how we use social to enable those business objectives. Is that right?
Correct.
So, and then you said, well, for this at top, we need only 20% of our efforts to address this, to implement, to provide the technologies and to get people on there. And
Correct.
then we need 80% of all the efforts on changing all the culture behind it or underneath it. So is it, well, for me it's surprising because already the effort for introducing, getting people to use the tool also for business objectives, you need some change management, some community management. So is
Correct.
this already part of the 80% or is this part of the 20%?
Yes, it is. It's part of the 80. So the 80% really, and it's generally a very good rule of thumb based on our experience of, I say, working with all sizes and types of organizations, is really roughly 80% of time is spent on the communications, training, community management, and the business value discovery pieces. In the case of Yammer and Office 365, these are cloud products. So the deployment piece is generally very low friction because the time to value you don't have to build servers or racks or data centers and et cetera. And certainly in the case of Yammer, you don't have any data to migrate. So really that 20% is just involved around integrations that will reduce the barriers to engagement for the user.
So regarding the assessment of finding the right business orientation, well, this is very much specific of company and industries, but regarding the communication plans and the community management, are there general recommendations you can give? So what are the tasks to do within these fields? So
that's a really, really good question. So I'll take the question around the business value discovery first. So I think first of all, it's important to tie that with executive participation to make sure that you have very clear strategic business objectives. And this could be a simple series of workshops or just brainstorming around with key stakeholders from the line of business around what they need. So in retail, for example, we have a lot of retail customers, and one of their biggest challenges is they say, well, actually, all of our best ideas, or a lot of them, come from people in the stores, but we don't have access to people in the stores. So one of the business challenges there will be to then work with the people who manage retail to understand what kind of information they need to see in order to make business decisions. And it can be, in some cases, as simple as, well, we just want people to photograph displays that are working very well to share them with their colleagues. So we want to go through that process of engaging the right people in the business to understand what the business challenges are. Around the community management and training piece, it's really, firstly, like for training, is actually look about how do we deliver education right now? What do we do? Do we use online? Do we have a training department? Do we actually use outside parties? And working out what the best way is to deliver a mechanism of training users. And generally what we find is where we help is where the gaps are. So an organization may have a gap saying, well, we don't really have training people, but we actually have a lot of assets that are available for free to actually help people get up to speed. And generally they're very lightweight because use of the tool is designed with the user in mind. And community management is really around having those people in place, working with the business to identify who might be the right kind of people to do that, and also scaling that through champion users, because you will have people on the platform who, unbeknownst to them, are actually doing unofficially community management. So it's about nurturing them and providing them with education and guidance on what the behaviors are.
So a successful social adoption is really not a process by gut feeling, but a systematic approach.
So yes, I think so. The way we would judge success is firstly in business terms, which is value. So we've started to communicate this way. We're driving people to the platform. Have we actually altered our business metric that we wanted to measure? And the other way we would measure it is not from value, but from health. So we'll use our analytical tools to actually look at the health of our social network. Because in order for us to affect a business change, we're going to need a certain number of people to do that. So a very good example is I worked with a customer whose challenge was they hired a lot of graduates every year, but it took a very long time to get the graduates up to speed before they could go out and generate revenue. They were consultants. So what they decided to do was to, in this case, use their Yammer network to invite the graduate to the company network before they'd started. So they'd signed their contract, but they hadn't started yet. And what this allowed them to do was connect those graduates with their manager, with HR, with other graduates, so they could self-organize, find a place to live, share places, work out how to do their expenses, get their corporate credit card, etc. We came back and looked a few months later and found that they were able to reduce the onboarding time by that of the graduate by nearly 3 weeks, which had a knock-on effect on how much revenue the company could make. But we also statistically looked at the analytics for the group where this was all happening to make sure that we were driving HR people to that group and finance people and managers to that group, as well as the graduates, so we had enough people there to affect the business change.
Great. Well, the music is running already.
Yeah,
the time is over, but thank you very much for your insights on the adoption process. A warm applause, please, for Rav Dhaliwal from the Yammer success team in Europe.